And thanks very much for the invitation. I think we just had a very powerful speech from Fabio, pointing us at the risks and the dangers that we face and the crisis that we are facing. I fully endorse that. I fully agree with that. But at the same time, I think it's my role to show you that there are also possibilities and opportunities to solve the crisis and to learn how to live with it. And that there are good solutions possible that make the investment in climate resilience pay off. Because what we need as an answer to the climate crisis is climate resilience. And I will show you a couple of solutions, best practices around the world, how to do that. I myself am the Global Director for Climate Adaptation with Arcadis. That's a global engineering firm, also based in Italy, but we have our origins from the Netherlands. And that's where my story starts. I think we are all aware of the heritage, the Dutch heritage. The Netherlands has been living with water for more than 1,000 years, have been finding solutions how to deal with the impacts of climate change and also how to deal with the potentials of storms that are of all times, of course. And the Dutch have learned how to combine flood protection with land reclamation, because the Netherlands was a relatively small country that has extended its land by land reclamation. Sometimes the Americans say the God created the world, but the Dutch created the Netherlands, which is partly true. The Dutch also had to live through several very severe floods, in particular 1953. They built a big storm surge barrier system, comparable to Venice barrier, but even much bigger than that, to protect the land. And over time, the Dutch have learned to move from a more civil engineered solution, civil engineered system, including even the windmills that you see here that are part of that system, to a more nature-based type of solution. And we're still in the process of changing from civil engineering to nature-based solutions. I'm going to show you a nature-based solution right in the middle of that IJssel Lake picture that you see in the middle of my screen. This is called Markerwadden, and I really would like to encourage you to Google it and find some websites and YouTube movies around it. This is a completely new created land in the middle of that lake. It serves as a foreshore flood protection, but it's also serving as a new ecosystem that has been created by creating these new islands from the mud from the bottom of the Markermeer, from the Marker Lake. Lots of turbidity, very poor ecosystem as a result, and that is now really very rapidly improving with these new islands that are created. There are some fantastic movies on YouTube by filmmakers. Biologists, ecologists are really positive, seeing the pioneer vegetation and pioneer fauna coming up now, about 5 years after construction. And as you see in the picture, there's also room for visitors, for leisure. There's a Dutch educational programs, school classes are brought here. So there's a combination here of nature development and leisure that works out very well for this building with nature project, as we call it. So this is a nature-based solution. Another example I want to show you is along the Dutch coastline. As you know, as the impact of sea level rise also impacts the Dutch, we had to reconsider our coastal flood protection. We found that there are a number of weak spots along that western coastline that you see here. And the Dutch decided, in addition to the existing dike system, to come up with new type of solutions, not just raising the dikes, but adding new softer types of solution like dunes to it, but also adding new functionalities to those dikes. For instance, a boulevard in Scheveningen, the well-known tourist resort. But in the middle, you see the city of Katwijk that has the most spectacular addition, and that is a parking garage. You won't believe it, but it's really true. This is a dike system that has a parking garage built to it underground, right adjacent to it. It's covered by a dune, and that dune also has a raised beach in front of it. And the combination of that all results in a very natural landscape now that really has improved the quality of this beach resort. It's much more attractive. There's more visitors coming, and on sunny days, the extra bonus is that they don't have to stand in a 2-hour traffic jam in front of the city, but because of this enormously very long and thin parking garage, they can drive on one side into the village, go right underground in the parking garage, take the stairs up to the beach and walk to their beach resort and have a good time. So that's a combination, a multifunctional solution, as we call it, multifunctional flood protection, combining nature-based elements and civil engineered solutions. And the best of it all is it even generates cash revenues because the parking garage sells tickets. And I sometimes, it's a bit of a joke, but all around the world, I tell the story that as far as I know, this is still the only dike in the world that actually earns money. And just a step further than that, not so far away from Katwijk, you find in the middle of Rotterdam, this sea dike. You won't believe it, but this is a primary flood protection. It is just like Katwijk. It has a parking garage and it has a park on top here, a pedestrian zone. But this one even goes a step further because it even includes a shopping mall on the side and a restaurant on top. So as in this dense urban environment, of course, multifunctionality is key because this is very precious urban space. Every square meter is valuable. And to make it feasible, it really needs those additional functionalities. And on top of that, it has another benefit. As you can imagine from that aerial picture that you see, usually dikes or flood walls are dividers who are obstacles in our environment. They separate neighborhoods from each other. Or the example that Fabio gave of New Orleans, they separate you from the river, so you can't even see the river anymore. You don't even have that feeling of being in a delta city. Now, this dike, you can imagine, as you see all these pedestrians walking, this is not a separator, this is a connector. This is basically connecting communities. So there's a lot of extra advantages in that. Now, these are some best practices from the Netherlands. The challenge, of course, for us was to see how we can bring those good examples to other places where the challenges can even be bigger. And I started in New York, where, Hurricane Sandy created enormous challenge, 2012, with some fatalities and a lot of area flooded. But the real big challenge, you see it in all these red flags, creating a new level of required urban resilience at our planet. And that was to better protect and make more resilient all these red flags that you see here. And these are basically, this is critical assets and vital infrastructure, tunnel, bridges, power generation, data centers, telecommunications, but also the subway and also hospitals. So on all these red flags, we are working right now, trying to make these facilities more resilient, because as a basic for our cities, you can say, what we really need is, even if there are areas flooded, we have to be certain that all our functionalities and all our primary functions, our critical assets are working, that we can pick up the phone and make a call, that we can go to the hospital if somebody is ill or wounded, that et cetera, that we can take the subway the day after the flood and go to our work. Now, that's what we're working on. At the same time, New York realized it needed more than that. It also needed a more integrated type of solution in that dense urban fabric. So the idea of a design competition was developed. I think an idea that the Polytechnico students and professionals really would love. It's called Rebuild by Design. It was a competition that President Obama announced. It was implemented by Secretary Sean Donovan, and he appointed the Dutchman, Henk Ovink, to lead this Rebuild by Design competition. And we were fortunate to be part of the Big U team with Bjarne Ingres and other partners, and be part of this iconic solution that you see here, this yellow meandering line around the tip of Lower Manhattan that basically indicates that we should look for solutions that are integrated in this dense urban fabric. That should be solutions that are landscaped and are integrated into the environment. But at the same time, you see the straight lines. Sometimes it also requires bold, practical, straightforward solutions because you have to deal with that dense urban environment. We've been part of that conceptual design phase, and we were fortunate and also capable enough to take it to the next phase. And we are actually, and that is why I'm so happy that I can show you two of these built images. That is actually something going to be done now in New York. 10 years after Sandy, we are building the so-called East Side Coastal Resiliency Project. So that's the lower east side of Manhattan, right underneath the bridges there. Multifunctional flood protection again, with a very strong community-driven approach, where the reconnecting the community to the waterfront is key. So taking out a lot of the flood walls, but also dealing with the challenge of this FDR, the highway that runs along the waterfront and cuts off the neighborhoods from the waterfront. So this is a very multifunctional solution that has been created here. It's right now under construction. The next phase is even more challenging. We are now in the planning phase of that, and this is really top of the bill. This is called Financial District and Seaport. And you can imagine what that means. Financial district means Wall Street. So this is the Wall Street area, very, very, very densely built with high-rise skyscrapers. And right next to that, the FDR, the highway. Now, the plan here is that we find multifunctional solutions like the artist impression that you see here, soft solutions. But there is simply not enough space for that. The FDR is too close to the waterfront. In this case, we are negotiating and we are assessing the possibility of slightly going into the water here, into the East River, without impact the ecosystem too much, and also without too much impact on the hydrodynamics of the system, because this is a tidal flow area here, to allow us to have a few more extra meters along the waterfront here to develop these multifunctional solutions. Otherwise, we would simply not be able to come up with these solutions. And just show you what that looks like a little bit. This is what the situation looking southwards down. So you're looking down to the tip of Manhattan, which is Battery Park. And you see the high-rise buildings of Wall Street on the right and the FDR in this purple color. And you see this straight bolt forward concrete flat plane. And the idea is to develop it into what you see here now. So a much softer approach, a lot of community space, also a lot of tourist space and visitor space, because this is an area with very high visitor density. You see to the left side a lower esplanade that is not always accessible, but that creates that access to the waterfront. And you still see that purple FDR as a viaduct here to the right. One of the possible ideas that is on the table right now is also to consider whether or not it would be possible to take the whole FDR probably out. And that would be a giant jump forward. But given the traffic density right now and knowing how fond the Americans are of their cars, that will be a big challenge. But New York is really thinking into that direction of maybe taking the FDR out here at the tip of Lower Manhattan. I can only show here artist impressions because this project is now full in swing. We're now working on the master plan. And so these were just a few examples. I want to finish with two big and well-known examples where I explicitly want to mention, yes, resilience can pay off. We don't always see those benefits. We all know there are benefits in investing in resilience because you avoid a future flood, but also because when people know that you avoid a flood in an area, values go up, real estate values, land values go up. You also know that investing in climate resilience in our cities, you also create a better ecosystem. Just imagine green roofs or more parks. You also invest in the fact that you have a more healthy urban population and you create more quality of life for the citizens. These are all things that create value, but still that doesn't always convince, that never convinces those that have to invest the billions that come with these big flood protection measures. Fortunately, every now and then we see examples that say, hey, yes, now we see. The one example you see here is what has been part of my life for the last 15 years. That's the flood protection system, the hurricane risk reduction system of New Orleans. Fabio also already talked about New Orleans here. This shield, this ring of steel and concrete, it's not very nature-based, but it was very rapidly built after the hurricane because the city was completely unprotected at that time. What was built around the city, it was a $14.5 billion US spent in 5 years' time. Nobody knew if that was a wise investment or not, although we all saw how New Orleans recovered in the last 10 years, how the economy got back on its feet, how the visitors came back, how new industry developed. Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie came, stimulated the film business, a lot of other gaming industry, conference industry, a lot of industry came back. But then last summer, of course, the real moment came. Hurricane Ida came. It was a devastating hurricane that destroyed parts of the East Coast, that had a devastating impact even all the way up to New York. But it was not able to destroy New Orleans. New Orleans, although the hurricane was stronger than Katrina, was very safe, very well protected. There was some wind damage, there was some power failures, there were even a few casualties. But compared to the disaster of Katrina, this was really peanuts. And New Orleans really can say now that in those, let's say, 5 years of investment, 2007 to 2012, 10 years later now, they have a 100% return on investment on that $14.5 billion. So for New Orleans, definitely resilience paid off. And another one where it paid off was in that same summer. So although the summer showed us the impact of climate change and an alarm bell that showed us that there's no way we can longer suggest that climate change may be just a probability. No, but that same summer also showed us that we can do something about it. I showed you New Orleans, coastal resilience. Here you see one in the river resilience. The Netherlands has been investing enormously in flood management for the river system after major floods in 93 and 95. So it took us over 25 years to build this system. You see all the red dots in that big river system, Rhine, Meuse, and in particular the red dots on the top left side along the river Meuse. That were the one that really made the difference when, as we all know, Europe was impacted by gigantic rainfall, torrential rainfall on the Limburg part, the southern part of the Netherlands, but also the parts of the Eifel in Germany and in Belgium, as well as in the Ardennes. So our neighbor countries really got a full hit here. Fortunately, the works that were developed along the river Meuse, they held, they worked very well. I understand, I recognize that the Netherlands was not as hard hit as Belgium and Germany, but still, we didn't have even a single casualty. We had our major damage outside the Meuse River and in the city of Valkenburg, which was not part of the system. But this system here, and you see how nature-based these river widening solutions are, they really held. It was challenging, and it was also quite critical. You see the sandbags being pushed here against the hospital in Maastricht. You see the boulevard in Venlo almost flooded here. You see people walking in it. It really came to the edge, but the system held. So also in this case, the Dutch learned that resilience paid off. You see here the city of Roermond, aerial photograph from one of our engineers. It was critical, but also here, the Dutch can say this was a bit a smaller investment, but still around 2 billion euro were spent. And we had to wait 15 years to see if the system really worked. And fortunately, we can conclude that it did. So fully recognize the impacts of climate change and the big risks that we are facing and the future that will bring many challenges. Fortunately, I also believe still that there is some hope that there are things that we can do to make our cities and our citizens resilient against the impact of climate change. And that's my story. Thank you very much for your attention. And I give it back to the moderator.